The 2020s have been a complicated time for the state of Florida. Back in April of 2020, just 4 months after the turn of the decade, Florida passed New York, becoming the third most populated U.S. state.
Population tripling in growth, and in fact, that growth hasn't stopped. You could see just by all of the development.
But something else was happening back in April of 2020, pushing nationwide migration to new highs while expanding on Florida's already historic growth. Adding 1.5 million residents since just 2020, Florida now has more than 23 million residents and a statewide housing market that's already topped $400,000. But if you look not that far back to, say, the early 2000s, Florida was a completely different place. Having just 16 million residents and a much lower median home price of less than $140,000. Back before urbanization completely spread out from Florida's principal cities of Orlando, Miami, Tampa, and Jacksonville, making almost everywhere in Florida a suburb of somewhere else there. Taking a toll all across central Florida, as suburban sprawl from the state's most populated destination cities has given way to a spiderweb of new cities, while small towns turned into medium-sized cities almost overnight, with places like Ocala, Wildwood, Davenport, and Lakeland being almost unrecognizable. While Florida's sparsely populated panhandle cities have become all grown up, with Panama City Beach growing by 34% since just 2010, and Tallahassee now having more than 200,000 citywide residents, while Freeport, located in Florida's affluent Walton County, has grown from less than 2,000 residents in 2010 to more than 12,000 today. But decades of steady, yet significant growth couldn't prepare Florida for the massive influx it's experienced since the turn of the decade, with the imperfect storm of West Coast businesses looking for tax incentives, along with a dwindled labor pipeline, billions in new capital popping up all across southern Florida, leading Florida to a population surge of 5% over the course of just 3 to 4 years, adding 1.5 million new residents, with those new residents needing homes, state services, and utilities in a place that was already stretched thin. With the rental market in Miami-Dade, for instance, growing far beyond just uncomfortable, as Miami real estate prices overshadow the city's more modest median wages. Florida's surge in the early 2010s and the decade of booming growth that preceded it have been great for business interests, real estate speculators, and the state's powerful upper class, while it's being something entirely different for working Florida families, many of whom never fully recovered from the state's uniquely painful experience with the Great Recession of 2008. With poverty in Florida growing by 8% from 2010 to 2022, as meager wage growth in Florida's key industries has slid further behind the state's rising cost of living, while droves of new residents from places like California and New York are able to purchase Florida homes above asking price with just the excess equity from their previous homes in cities where median home prices near $1 million or more. As the growth that's happening in Florida comes mostly from America's most costly cities and states, pushing native residents out of their neighborhoods, city, or the state entirely, making Florida an increasingly stratified state where the rich enjoy pristinely beautiful secluded beaches, top-notch amenities, and nearly endless opportunities to grow their wealth, while the majority of the state struggles with increasing costs, terrible commutes, and little time to enjoy life in a place many once considered their own personal paradise. But Florida's people problem and its economic headache pale in comparison to the state's geographic nightmare. That's because the state of Florida, with its massively lucrative coast, caught between the active waters of the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, is the most hurricane-prone place in the entire United States. But that's only part of the story, as Florida was built on drained wetlands, is covered in porous limestone, and has a uniquely saturated subtropical climate. That's why sinkholes are popping up all over the state, with this area in western Florida being coined Sinkhole Alley, as heavy rain and a karst limestone environment give way to nearly 30,000 new sinkholes just last year. While the devastation of strong hurricanes, in a state where 41% of the landmass is considered prone to flooding, isn't an if, it's a when. While improved building codes in recent years have done little to slow the problematic nature of rebuilding over and over on properties already affected by hurricanes, floods, and sinkholes, something that has caused Florida, where the average elevation is just 100 feet above sea level, to become the most uninsurable state in the U.S., forcing Florida to form the Citizens Property Insurance Corporation, a last resort for the more than 10% of Floridians already without other insurance options. And keep in mind, this isn't just the major coastal cities of Tampa, Miami, and Jacksonville that are extremely prone to natural disasters, with Florida's problems spread all across the state, as inland cities like Gainesville and Orlando are at significant risk of future flooding, while sinkholes have wrecked the villages, and southwestern Florida, after years of contamination, is suffering from water quality issues But with hurricane damages there being factored more and more in the billions, not millions, while Florida is hit by an average of 6 to 7 costly storms each year, hurricane damage remains the state's greatest concern, with more of them hitting a greater range of cities in recent years. Of course, that's the thing about Florida's increasingly uninsurable housing market, with so much property being at risk, even when an event doesn't occur or an area lies untouched. The concern for next time or next year will always be on the mind of the few insurance companies left there and the millions of families spread across the state just looking for some safety and stability. That's why more and more Americans are asking if Florida still offers a viable future for its 23 million residents, as the demographic, economic, and geographic problems there are really stacking up, leading to a lull in population growth and a housing market that's no longer red hot. As the mounting problems and big questions have led many Floridians to second-guess Florida's place in their future plans.